this life is a trade-off of freedom versus comfort. Everything in life is security and comfort versus freedom. You guys live in nice houses, you have all the comforts, you have very limited freedom.
Bob, freedom cannot be found in minimalism or abundance or where you live. Freedom is your state of mind, your attitude, and whatever your circumstance may be. Living in a tent, on the beach, a van, or a palace.
First off, this video isn't intended to set people apart or against one another, but bring them together so that we both appreciate everybody's situation and preference. Not here to say if someone is wrong or right on the subject of van life and what Bob Wells said as the fact that, you know, if you live in a house and you're not living in your car, sure you have comfort, but you have no freedom, which is a bunch of bullshit, Bob, okay? Freedom doesn't come from the house that you live in or the van you live in. It's an inalienable right given to man by our Creator, okay? It's in here, not in a place or a possession or where you live. Freedom is here. So I want to set the thing straight, because you claim that everything is great out there in the van life world for the retirees, people my age, 70, 73, 75 and older, and it's not, okay? I would not allow my mother to be living out in the middle of the desert unless she really, really, really wanted to do that. Then reluctantly, it's her right to choose. Just like anybody's right to choose. Live in a house, live in a palace, live in a car, live on the street in San Francisco. It's choices. But Bob, your vans and your van living doesn't mean freedom, okay? Every video I watch with people, including on this one, I took some excerpts from some documentary you were on, and where you said that homeless people are homeless and they don't want to live in vans. They want to live elsewhere. Well, how do you know that?
There's a continuum of people who live in vehicles. There are the homeless, and right now in America there are a lot of those who are just cannot, they lost their job, and then they lost their house, and then they've lost their apartment. They're in their cars because they have absolutely no choice. They are homeless.
But you say van lifers are set apart because they choose to live in a van.
And then there are people such as myself and Sherry and lots of other people you're going to meet who choose to live in their vehicles. And
well, in the video that you said that, it actually, all the cases all start out with some sort of tragedy, family tragedy or economic tragedy, like 2008. People have lost their savings and their dreams. They weren't thinking about living in a van, but now they had to consider it. And every one of their stories starts with a tragedy, and they went, including your own, your divorce and the fact that you wanted to eat. So I don't believe it's a choice. It may become a choice and they find some freedom in it. But I think you're overhyping a lot of this. You know, people going around and showing them their little van and they're sleeping in it. And Nomad Land kind of tried to say, you know, or point out that way of life. But I'm telling you, shitting in a bucket in the middle of the night in a van in the middle of the desert without air conditioning, well, I'm not too sure people would choose that. I don't even think people on the street, homeless, chose it. I had good friends in Hawaii.
There are the homeless, and right now in America there are a lot of those who are just cannot, they lost their job, and then they lost their house, and then they've lost their apartment. They're in their cars because they have absolutely no choice. They are homeless.
What was it? I had good friends in Hawaii. I'd walk on the beach every morning, and there was a lot of homeless there, and I got to have some good friends. And they all had the same thing. They're not homeless, they're houseless, because who can afford a house in Hawaii? So they all, that I knew, they all went to work in the morning, rode their bikes, walked or whatever, and came back to their tent on the beach. And I told them, you know, you're houseless, but you've got beachfront property. So, you know, life could be worse, right?
And then there are people such as myself and Sherry and lots of other people you're going to meet who choose to live in their vehicles, and then
The McLeans have been living in an RV since 2010, after the Great Recession sank their LA motorcycle repair shop and their home.
Basically, the car business kind of took a dive with the recession and forced a big re-examination on our parts.
And we go where the economy is good.
Tens of thousands of retirement-age Americans are migrant laborers or work campers. Their son died by suicide.
We started out with what we call our Journey for Joshua, which was to honor our son. But the reality after about 3 years was it's expensive to live on the road. You need new tires. Maintenance costs are high.
in 1995, I was going through a divorce, and I lived in Anchorage, Alaska. And after the divorce is expensive, and I paid alimony and child support, and no quibbles with that. I thought it was all reasonable. I couldn't afford to live. I literally could not afford to rent an apartment and buy food to eat. So one or the other, I was going to eat, and I was going to eat.
In 2008, I retired and needed something to do, and I don't have a lot of retirement, so 2009, I just took off in my first little van.
Actually. And then there's one woman in the book, and I know that she passed away on the road. And sadly, that does happen. I remember when Swanky was on the road once, she was parked near somebody in an RV, and they'd been exchanging tips about painting and art, and she liked him. And she walked by one day, and there were flies on the screen. And he had mentioned that family was going to come help him, or friends or something, but nobody had come. And she had to call the coroner.
I had a fire, and it wasn't my house that burned down, it was my life. And everything that I held dear and precious pretty much vanished in a wink of an eye.
Well, what advice do you have for would-be nomads?
Yeah, have a good emergency fund. Because as I saw on the road, and as if anybody's seen the film, you don't want to be one broken axle away from out on the street without your transportation, which is also your home, which also has possibly all your possessions in it. So,
Holy crap.
It's like the tire fell off or something.
And it won't go.
No, look at the smoke.
My life had gone downhill a long ways. I lost my wife, and then lost my health, and lost my business, and health costs and everything else. So I went from the nice house with the picket fence on the hill, the wife, and I was married for over 20 years to her, and business owner, small trucking company, and things just went downhill. I had a stroke, and then just everything. Diabetes hit me. So I found myself renting a room.
First of all, what people used to call a three-legged stool for retirement finance, trying to get my three-legged thing out here, has become a pogo stick. In that it used to be pensions and savings and your Social Security. And a lot of people were decimated in terms of their savings in 2008. Meanwhile, pensions.
In the new drama Nomadland, we meet a group of mostly older Americans who've lost jobs, savings, and homes in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. Several of the key characters are played by real nomads, whose lives were first captured in the nonfiction book on which the film is based.
These are people who got caught between flat wages and rising rents, in the failures of retirement finance, in the collapses of the Great Recession. There are people who realize that for most Americans, our biggest cost is housing. So I think a lot of the people I met were using this lifestyle as a hack to get around these economic impossibilities that a lot of Americans are facing today. And that made them incredibly creative and resilient.
But, you know, in saying all these things, I felt, you know, a disclaimer. It's not aimed at anybody to start this with. Then I wanted to give everyone my street creds for being able to talk to this. Well, you know, all right. I've been homeless. I've been homeless in Seattle, living in Saltwater Park with 2 kids, no job, and little hope. So I know a little bit about being homeless. I did recover, got a job, a good one. God gave me a good job. We slowly built out of that. But even when we did get a place to live, an apartment, there wasn't much in there. So I know about minimalism. I've been bankrupt from a bad business decision, lost everything, including my home that I had been building for 10 years. So I know something about loss. I've lost friends, etc. My first van life experience was in 1969 when I was an 18-year-old hippie in California. And I fixed that van up. It was my first DIY van. And I enjoyed that van. But I also had an apartment, okay? But I was in the Navy at the time. I've had vans and or campers, small RVs ever since, and I'm 73 now. So I know about van life, I know about RVs, I know about the pluses and minuses. I've been down and out, so I know about tragedy. So I can speak to this. I can speak to this whole subject. But I didn't find freedom in any of the tragedy or any of those vans. I found freedom within me, given to me by my Creator. It's just like in the Declarations of Independence. You know, freedom is something it isn't in a place or a possession. It's an inalienable right, again, given to us by our Creator, just like our founding fathers said in the Declaration of Independence. And actually, van lifers are declaring their independence from household stuff and taxes and the rest of it, and just going out in the desert and living this wonderful life. It's not the case all the time. But again, the Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, I've come to find out that happiness comes from contentment. If people are content to be in a van in the middle of the desert, that's great. But I feel there's a lot of them that aren't. They would rather be somewhere else. You know, comfort doesn't come from warm showers and chair height toilets. Comfort, again, is contentment. You know, it can be, like Paul says, I know what is to be in need, in want, and in plenty, well fed or hungry, in comfort, in a house or a van. I know all of those things, but I find contentment in Christ throughout any of them. You know, I'm going to talk a little bit about nomad. Jesus was the first nomad. You know, he traveled around. He even said, foxes have den, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. So he lived that nomad life, that ministry life. So, and I, my grandmother told me, have Romani blood in me, gypsy blood. So I've got this wanderlust in me. That's what she said. Jimmy, you're always going all over the place. You're traveling and living in all these places. That must be your gypsy blood. So, let's see, I gave street creds that I've been through a lot of this, and I'm 73, so I know a little bit about it. Oh, I forgot. I'm also just finished a 2-month on the road in our latest van, Life, lady we call Lucille because of Lucille Ball and the movie Long Long Trailer, and B.B. King named his guitar Lucille. So I thought Lucille's a great name for the RV. But that experience, this 2-month experience, when you talk about costs, we had a major breakdown, a rear end, broken axle. And we wound up trying to get 2 fixes on the way back to get it to get us home. And it is still broke. It did get close, about 200 miles from here. We're going to go get it. But it's going to require $10,000, a whole new rear end, and then I'm doing some improvements, so to the suspension, etc. But that's $10,000. And we spent a lot of money on that trip. Gas, at $3 something a gallon. If you want to travel a lot, the van life you're talking about is like go out in Quartzsite, not in the peace of serenity and by a lake, by yourself. My definition of camping is a place you go where you can't see or hear your neighbor. Only the crackling fire and the birds singing. That's it. So going out in the middle of the desert in Quartzsite with 100,000 other people, I live in a rural state, a farming state. In fact, most farmers qualify. They can camp, they're camping every day in their yard because they can't see or hear their neighbors. So all I'm saying is if that's what you like doing, that's great. But don't make it sound like it is freedom and try to convince a lot of 70-somethings that they can live in a vehicle just fine, because it's crap. All right? If you get sick, what are you doing? Trying to take care of yourself in a van? You have a major breakdown? There's a lot of issues, dangerous ones. If you broke down, then your van is your transportation and your home, and all your possessions are in it. Even the gal that wrote the book, Nomadland, said that same thing. One broken axle away from disaster. Well, I've gone on a lot, and I'll have to trim this down. But this isn't intended to slam anybody, just to correct some of this marketing hype of RVers, RV manufacturers, campgrounds, all the rest of it. It's BS, okay? Traveling and driving and having your own bed with you is very nice. I agree. It's not, but full-time isn't for me. I don't care how big a fifth wheel it is or any of that. And it seems funny, but these people go out in the middle of the desert with these huge fifth wheels with 8 expandos and a garage and all this stuff, satellite and the whole thing, and consider themselves as camping. Wow. So I put this short piece together just to talk about what camping is and what it isn't, what living full-time is and what it isn't, and just to address that statement in the beginning of this video, that people who live in a house have plenty of comfort, but no freedom. And people that live in a van in the middle of the desert, shitting in a bucket, have all the freedom in the world, but little comfort.